So what does success look like? What does it look like? If you were to describe it, when you know it, when you saw it, you may say, well, I know what success doesn't look like. It doesn't look like that suit you're wearing, Dave. That is the most ill-fitting, out-of-date garment I have seen in a long time. Well, yeah, 3 weeks ago, I wore my favorite suit, a suit that was made for me, that was tailored for me, that I spent a lot of money on in order to get this job, and that was my success suit. But this is a hand-me-down suit, a suit I've had for 30 years. So deal with it. But is that really how we define success? I mean, by the clothes we wear, by the house we live in, by how we appear? I think that's the common notion, whether we like to admit it or not. The common notion is that we define success kind of as a trajectory, like a hockey stick. And if one of the axes is money or power or happiness or just the freedom from the hassles of life, we think of success as the greater amount of freedom and resources and the less amount of hassles and problems, and that would be a successful life. And for most of us, those definitions are as individual as our fingerprints, but we all have ideas that kind of run the same way. But 3 weeks ago, when I was wearing my success suit, I introduced an alternative paradigm for success. It's a paradigm for success that begins with an ordered life, that begins with putting pieces in place that are fairly typical of a trajectory of success, but that gets interrupted. And that interruption then disorders our life. And in the reordering of our life, we then begin to follow a path that looks very different from the traditional definitions of success. It is what I call descending into greatness, or free falling. Now, I wish I could tell you that I came up with this. In fact, I could tell you this. The problem is that since most of you can read, you would find out that I plagiarized it from a number of other authors, my favorite of which is a Franciscan priest from New Mexico named Richard Rohr. And Richard Rohr has written a number of books, all of which are frankly worth your time. One of my favorites is called Falling Upward. And it's here that the idea of this pattern of order, disorder, reorder, this new paradigm for success, he talks about it. And he talks about it this way. He says the pattern of spiritual transformation, order, disorder, reorder, moves you from either or thinking to both and thinking. The ability to increasingly live with paradox and mystery. You no longer think in terms of win or lose, but in terms of win or win. It is a very different mind and strategy for life. In order for this alternative consciousness to become your primary way of thinking, you usually have to experience something that forces your either-or thinking to fall apart. Often the only thing that can break down your natural egocentricity is discovering that the qualities you hate in others are actually within you. You're not so moral after all. Perhaps you hate homosexuality, and then you meet a wonderful gay couple. Or you meet a Muslim who's more loving than most of your Christian friends. Or you encounter a young immigrant who doesn't match your stereotypes at all. Something must break your addiction to yourself and your opinions. Your first reaction is a struggle. What do I do now? I don't like this. I can't deal with this. I want to go back to my familiar and habitual world. You know your lesbian daughter is good and you love her, and you don't want to reject her. Inside such liminal space is where real change happens, where your self-serving little dualisms must fall apart. It might be called falling up. It might be a new paradigm for success. Today, we're going to make some dangerous conclusions, and I'm going to introduce you, and I want to warn you, to some difficult things. some things that really challenge us to redefine how we see success. But before we enter into that conversation, would you pray with me? Father in heaven, I would ask that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart would be pleasing in your sight, and that you would use your words spoken by your servant, anointed by your Spirit, to blow holes in our paradigms and our fortresses, and to let the light and the grace flow in. I pray that for myself and for my family and for all of us here. For I ask this in Jesus' name, amen. I'm going to tell you a dangerous story this morning, and it's dangerous because I know that it will be very close to home for some of you, and it's a topic that is very delicate. This is not a PG or a PG-13 kind of topic. It's a story about my fortress. You see, I began my adult life and my preparation for my calling by following my mentor's instructions that it was important that I begin to construct a fortress into which I would invite my family and into which I would invite the church that I was the pastor of. And this is a fortress that was built of solid things. Convictions and beliefs and interpretations and preferences and things that mattered to me, things that I had studied and things that I had prepared. And I set about this task for the next 15 or so years of my life. I built this fortress, this tower of these solid convictions, of these solid beliefs, of the traditions that had been taught to me and handed down to me, because I believe that's what good godly men did and good godly pastors did. Because it was my responsibility to build the walls thick, to stand against the storms of life, because life is hard and life is awful, and I want my heart and my family and my people to be safe inside the walls of this fortress. So I was good at it. And by the time I got to my early 30s, I had constructed what was becoming a beautiful tower, a beautiful refuge, a beautiful, strong fortress of belief and conviction. And I brought my family into that, and my church was inside of that, and it was a safe place. It was a good place. It was a place where we all lived together and we shared the confidence of what we believed. It didn't mean it didn't take some hits. It didn't, get bashed up against by the realities of the world, but it was strong. It was immovable. I was following Ephesians chapter 2, verse 20, where I was building on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets with Christ Jesus as the chief cornerstone. You could say that my theme song was Ein Festeberg, the great Reformation hymn by Martin Luther. We know it as "A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing. He amidst the flood of mortal ills prevailing." This was my fortress. You were safe inside. And one day, one of the members of my church, a guy I really liked, came to me and said, I have a friend. He got married a few months ago, and she had a daughter, and they're trying to make their marriage work, and they're really, really struggling. They're having a really hard time. Would you go see them? And I was young enough to believe that I had some pastoral competency, even though, truth be told, I have none. Because my counseling philosophy is the come on philosophy. You tell me, I'm really having a hard time with this, and I'm like, come on. I'm really having a hard time with drugs. Really? Come on. I'm really having a hard time, not abusing my wife. Come on. That was the terrible counselor that I was. But I was a pastor, so I went. I went with my therapeutic tool bag of come on and really, and went to their house. And then I got there, they were sitting on the sofa in their living room, and they struck me. I could see why they were having problems. They were a mess. I mean, she was really bright and really attractive, and he was really not. He was a day laborer. She was a paralegal. She had come into the relationship with a young daughter. They were having financial problems. They were both addicts. Their life was a wreck. Well, my training, my belief was that you have to get inside the fort. You have to get inside the wall. That's where the help is. If you can scale the wall of belief in Jesus, you can come in and be with us, and you'll be okay. Because I had seen that happen. And so I dangled down from the parapet of my ivory tower this rope, and it was the sinner's prayer. And there in the living room of their house, they prayed. They prayed to receive Christ right there. Now, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with this. This is a good thing. I believe there are transformational decisions that we make in our life all the time from which everything is different. I believe in that. I am a product of that kind of decision. But in this case, I invited them up the rope of the sinner's prayer, and they prayed the prayer, and they got to the top of the wall, and I invited them into the fortress, and I ran home and told my wife, this is a win for the good guys. Win for the home team. It's a notch in my belt. It's a trophy on our mantle. And I used to love when they would come to our church, because we were buttoned up in ties, and everybody kind of brought their Bibles, and they looked like they were coming from a Grateful Dead concert. And they would walk in. I mean, the church I was a pastor of, I could actually say, open your Bibles to the book of Zephaniah, and everybody knew where it was, except them. They were like, what? And I kind of liked that, because then this is kind of cool. But they came sporadically, and it was kind of like this interesting thing. They were kind of like the trophy weirdos who got saved. Now, the rest of the details of this story are sketchy with me, because there's parts of it I've had to forget, and parts of it that I can't. So I don't know how long the time was. It might have been 6 months, it might have been 9 months, it might have been a year. And I got a call from that same friend who had introduced me to this couple, and he said, he's at home, and he's really in a super dark place. I think he's going to kill himself. Can you go over? So I get in my car and I drive over to his house, and he lets me in, and sure enough, there's a gun on the table next to the sofa where he and his wife had prayed to receive Christ. And so I sit down next to him, and he's crying. And I said, what's going on? And he said, well, she left me. And so I said, okay. Tell me about it. Tell me what happened. And he began to sob with that depth of a soul cry as he buried his head into my chest as I held him. And he said, she filed charges against me. And I said, for what? He said, for sexually abusing her daughter. And I said, is this true? And he said, yes. And I have to tell you, in that moment, this was a bridge too far. This was too much to ask. The catalog of forgiveness that I had in my life did not include a chapter on someone who would harm a child the same age as my children. What was going on? And he is in the throes of a soul pain, telling me, admitting to this, and all I can think is, I want to choke the life out of you. I want nothing to do with you. Mercy does not have an application for you. So in my counseling expertise, I asked him the only question I knew how to ask. Why? Why would you do that? And through his sobs, he told me that he could not remember a day when his parents did not abuse him. He could not remember a time when they weren't yelling at him or physically punching him or putting out cigarettes on him. He could not remember a time when his father wouldn't come into his bedroom at night and say, "If you love me, you will let me." I don't remember if I prayed with him. I don't remember the details of what we said after that. I remember telling him, I feel honor-bound to contact the authorities. There's a warrant out for your arrest, and I know where you are, and I'm going to tell them where you are. Will you stay here? And he said, yeah, I will. It was before the time of cell phones, so I got in my car and I left. I drove back to my office and I called the police, and I said, this person is at this address. I just spoke to them. I'm his pastor, and he's waiting for you. When they arrived, he turned himself in. He confessed, and he was convicted, and he was sent to prison. I went to see his wife. I'm not sure why. A few months later, she was a paralegal downtown in Dallas, and I went to see her on a break, and she walked out of the building with me, and she was angry. She was angry at him with good reason. She was angry at me for just being there. And she was furious with God. God was untrustworthy. The promises God had made were broken. And that fortress I had built, that one with the beautiful white marble walls of right and wrong and good and bad, they were inside of it. They were in my fortress and had blown a hole in it. So I started to try to put the pieces back together, but they didn't fit anymore. It didn't make sense anymore. There are too many things I didn't understand, too many questions I couldn't answer, too many contradictions in my own soul to put the pieces back together. And I think this happens to all of us. This is that process where in the ordering of our life we encounter the reality of the traumas and of the disasters and of the unanswered prayers and questions that blow holes into our fortress. And typically we have two responses. One response is to say, okay, well, we'll fix that. We'll patch it up. Come on, it'll be okay. And we fit the stones back together, but they never go right. But we put in a lot of mortar and plaster and stucco and paint, and then we put a nice veneer over it. But it's never right. There's an increasing number of people who want nothing to do with that, and then when that hole gets blown in their fortress, they're out. I don't want the hypocrisy of it. I can't handle the duality of it. I can't handle the discomfort of it. So they abandon the fortress, and they live in spiritual yurts as Bedouins, out in the wind and out in the weather, saying that's better than living in a palace of hypocrisy. But there's a better way. There's a better way when our world is interrupted, when our tower is damaged, because it happens to all of us. There's only three kinds of people in the world. There are those who have had their world disordered. You know what it is. You've heard the words. You've felt the pain. You know that the tower will not stand. You know that already. And then there are people who have yet to experience that. Many of them are young people who are in the process of ordering their world, but it will happen. It will happen. And then there are those of you here today for whom it is happening right now. And the reordering of our world is the most important path that we can follow, because the disordering will happen. This is the story of Saul of Tarsus. This is the story of the Hebrew of Hebrews, the man who was well on his way, not just to building a tower, but to building an ivory tower. A magnificent theological structure into which he would insert himself, and from the top of which he would make pronouncements looking down on all of the rest of the unrighteousness and the evil of the world. And he was well on his way to doing that. And from that tower, he was hurling deadly accusations against the people, the followers of this young Galilean rabbi named Jesus. And on his way to drop fatal stones on their heads on the road to Damascus in 34 AD, his tower was turned to rubble. And it was there that the Hebrew of Hebrews began his descent into greatness. I believe that as we read the New Testament letters of the Apostle Paul, you see him moving from this confidence and this arrogance to this humility and this brokenness and this honesty. And the traces of that journey are kind of left in little breadcrumbs along the way. The first one that we looked at was from 56 AD. It was some 22 years after the road to Damascus. He was on his third missionary journey, and he was in the city of Ephesus, and he was writing to a church that he had helped start in the Greek city of Corinth. And there in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, he says to the people who were in his precious little church in Corinth, he says, I am the least of the apostles. I am no longer the Hebrew of Hebrews. I am no longer the best of the best. I am now the least of the best. And so the reordering of his private world, the reassembling of his ivory tower now included this window that helped him to see others as his equals, even as his betters. But the descent continued 4 years later when he was under house arrest in Rome. He wrote a letter to the church in Ephesus, which was tearing itself apart over these differences of their theological towers. They were building silos and towers in the church. And the Apostle Paul said, no, you don't understand. If anyone has a right to be in a tower, it's me. And I am, he says in the letter to the Ephesians, the least of all of God's people. I am no longer the best of the best. I am no longer the least of the best. Now I am the least of the rest. But it was about 4 years later. We don't know for sure. Most scholars believe that sometime around 67 AD, the Apostle Paul was arrested by the Emperor Nero for treason against the Roman Empire, and he was caught up in the machinery of the persecution of the young church. And they believe that he was beheaded sometime around 67 AD. A few years before that, when he was fully aware that he was living as a fugitive and living on borrowed time, he wrote to his protege, Timothy, who was the pastor in the church in Ephesus. Sometime around 63 or 64 BC, he wrote this letter, and he indicates to Timothy, I am no longer the best of the best, or the least of the best, or the least of the rest. I am literally now the least of the worst. He says in his letter to Timothy, here's a saying that deserves full acceptance. Jesus Christ came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am the worst. And the mercy that was shown me was shown to the worst of sinners. The word that he uses there twice is the word protos. It's from which we get prototype, the first. I am the prototypical sinner. There's no sinner who is worse than me. There's no sinner who has done something that is worse than anything I am ever done. I am just like everybody else, in desperate need of grace. And so we follow his descent through the trajectory of his life of over 30 years into this place where he can say, I'm no longer the Hebrew of Hebrews, the best of the best. I'm no longer the least of the apostles, the least of the best. I'm no longer the least of God's people, the least of the rest. I am now the least of the worst, the chief of sinners. I can tell you this has been my path. I wish I could tell you I got it nailed. I wish I could say, hey, everybody just follow me because I got this gold. No. I mean, the first one I got, the least of all the apostles, that one's kind of easy for me. I've always seen myself as the least of all pastors. I really have. I mean, I go to bed at night imagining that tomorrow I will wake up and you will have figured out that I don't know what I'm doing. They're gonna get it. They're gonna go, no, boy, Dave, what are you doing here? You're a mess. You don't, no, we're going to go find somebody that's really spiritual, not you. I've never had a problem seeing myself as the least of my peers, which isn't hard because I see most of my peers as nerds and geeks and people I wouldn't want to hang out with anyway. They're boring. Who wants to go to a conference with a bunch of pastors? Oh my gosh. Ugh. So I didn't really have a problem with that. This is not a work of great humility in Dave. I just always wanted to be the misfit and comfortable with that. I'm the least of my peers. I don't know how you are in the professional marketplace. How it is important for you to be the best in your law practice or the best in your medical practice or the best in your school or the best in the marketplace. I don't know how important that is to you. For me, it's easy. I mean, in fact, it's been my practice for most of my professional life. When people find out what I do, they say, what do you do? I say, I'm a pastor. They go, oh, where? I say, well, at Riverbend. And they say, well, what do you do at Riverbend? I say, whatever needs to be done, that's what I do. I say, well, what's your job? I say, well, I'm one of the pastors. I love saying that because I work with a team of men and women who lap me, who have the character and the integrity and the spiritual fortitude well beyond me, and I love being on that ground level with them. That's never been a problem for me. And I didn't think it was a problem for me to see myself as the least among us. You know what I love about this room? This room right here. It's so untraditional. You know what a traditional church normally does? Is it takes the pastor and puts it up here and puts you down here. You know what this room does? Exactly what I love. It puts me at your feet. I like being here. I like being down here. And that was never a problem for me because you're amazing. But you know what I've realized in the last few years is that I do have a problem here. And it's not because I put myself on a pedestal, but it's because I put you on pedestals. Because some of you are just so incredible. Some of you have such amazing stories and such amazing talents, and you're so skilled and you're so gifted and you're so successful and you're so beautiful. I'm like, oh, how could you ever do anything wrong? You're amazing. You're amazing people. I'm kind of sycophantic that way. And I admire you. And I'm becoming convinced that's the same as putting myself on a pedestal. Grace makes no distinctions. And so what I'm learning to do, and you're helping me, by the way, by inviting me into your lives. Thank you very much. Because you know what I'm finding? You're a mess. You're just as much of a mess as I am. And you're running around your offices and your corporations and your hospitals and your schools going, I sure hope they don't figure that out. I'm like, I know what that is. We're here. Yeah, okay, great. It's been hard for me, though. It's It's been hard for me to bring you down here to say, okay, we're all on this journey together. Because you seem to have it so figured out. But I know you're just like me. You're just like everybody else. So I'm working on that. I'm making progress in that. But it's this last area where the heavy lifting is for Dave. Right there. The chief of sinners. Because I sat on the sofa with a man who told me that he had done something that I could not comprehend. And the mercy that I was to have with him was a mercy that says, but for the grace of God, there go I. And it's still hard for me. It still doesn't feel comfortable. That there are things that I feel like I shouldn't let in. They should stay out there. But when he told me the story of his family, I realized he didn't choose that. He didn't choose his parents. He didn't choose to be abused. He didn't choose to have that poison inserted into his soul that wasn't his choice. And so somewhere in the both end of that, somewhere in the conflict and the discomfort of that is where I am. And the way that I describe that now is it puts an opening in my fortress. It starts off as windows. I mean, I used to patch up the holes and turn them into gun ports so I could shoot back at the people who disagree with me. But now it's a window. And you know what the window does? It lets light in. I understand something. I understand something about people who struggle with this that I didn't understand before. I understand something about the pain of it from a side that I never understood before. And it lets light shine out so that a person who is wandering in the darkness may see off in the distance a light and say, there's hope there. So now there's windows in my fortress, and there's really big traumas and difficult things have put doorways in my fortress. Now, some of those doors are revolving doors, and some of them are screen doors, and some of them are arches with porches out front. And some of them are dead-bolted doors that I'm still not comfortable being free, letting ideas come and go. But I'm trying to turn the fortress from a fort into a refuge. Because grace has to flow in for it to flow out. And it has to flow out for it to flow in. For example, one of the things that was part of my fortress building early in my life was my reverence for Scripture, my reverence for the Bible. My reverence for the Bible was something that I built as my fortress. And I built that fortress in such a way that if you disagreed with me, because I believed that the Bible was perfect, inspired by God, verbal plenary inspiration. I believed in a literal, historical, grammatical interpretation of the book. It was holy. It was sacred. And if you disagreed with me, I would climb up to the top of the parapet of my high fortress, and I would hurl theological insults down on you. Just like, remember the movie Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where King Arthur rides up to the fort and there's a Frenchman on the wall? And he says, I blow my nose at you, you silly English canigets. Remember that scene? And he says, I fart in your general direction. Because your mother was a hamster and your father smelled of elderberries. And if you do not leave, I will be tempted to taunt you a second time. Well, that was me. On top of the wall of my righteousness, saying, I don't even want to hear what you say. And people were saying, I'm confused by the Bible. I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me. And what they were saying is, come down and talk to me about it. And there were too many godly people that I met that were they just disagreed with me over some of these things. So I put on a door. And then that door, I built a porch. I've got a wraparound porch now with really nice Cracker Barrel rocking chairs. So if you come to me and you go, I just don't get the Bible. I just don't get it. I'm like, let's talk. Talk to me. Tell me, because I can learn from you. I want to hear you. I want to talk to you. Because we may be in different places in our opinions, but we are in the same place, both desperately in need of grace. And I cannot keep you out because you are just like me. That's what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 25. He said, what you do to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you do to me. See, this is where it happens. When I see myself as no different than the guy who I held in my arms on his sofa. But for the grace of God, we both need desperately mercy. And so my theme song has changed from Ein feste Burg, a mighty fortress is our God, to the theme song of grace. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was, but now am, was, but now I see. This is the journey. Order to disorder to reorder. It's really an internal journey. It's a journey where we define success by the external stuff. But the journey takes us into this place of disorder where we begin with me. I begin this relentless spiritual interrogation of my soul. And once I understand the why do I do this? Why do I think this way? Why do I need these things? When I begin to get a handle on that, then I can build a healthy us. And eventually, once I'm working on a healthy us, I can build a healthy we. And I can see everyone as desperately needing grace as me. This is what Richard Rohr calls falling upward, what I call descending into greatness. This is what Rohr says. If you have forgiven yourself for being imperfect, you can now do it for everyone else too. If you have not forgiven yourself, I'm afraid you will likely pass on your sadness, absurdity, judgment, and futility to others. We must go through the pain of disorder to grow up and switch our loyalties from self to God. Most people just try to maintain their initial order at all costs, even if it is killing them. If you're stuck in the first half of life, if you're stuck in that part where all you care about is ordering your life with your explanation about why you or your group are the best, you will hold on strongly because it's all you have, and any change feels like dying. Unless you somehow weep over your own phoniness, hypocrisy, fear, and woundedness, you probably won't let go of that first part of the journey, that first ordered definition of success. If you don't allow this needed disappointment to well up within you, if you surround yourself with your orthodoxies and your certitude and your belief that you're the best, frankly, you will stay trapped in that first half of life forever. While many religious people never allow themselves to fall, while many sinners fall and rise again, our greatest sin is not falling or failing, but refusing to rise and trust ourselves in God again. Make sure you are always in need of mercy, and you will never stop growing. Make sure you are descending to the place where you see yourself as desperately in need of grace. And this is the definition of success. So how do you define it? How do you define success? I think it's as individual as our fingerprints. Each of us, depending on where we come from, what our options are, what our opportunities are, what our resources are, what our commitments are, and ambition and insecurities are. Each of us have different metrics that measure success. But what does it look like? It looks like this suit, actually. This suit was given to me by a guy who was so successful that he bought new suits every 3 months. Not new suit every 3 months, new suits every 3 months. He said, Dave, I got these suits that I've only worn for 3 months. Would you like them? And I'm like, yes. He's bigger and taller than me, but they're free. Sounds like success to me. This is a suit that exists because of his success. What does success look like? May it be that it looks like us.